the points you mentioned is the data access, right? Data quality and the overall importance of data together with impact and value case to scale these technologies. Dr. May, I'd like to pick up this the follow-up question with you. How do you see, the need for strong data monitoring and verification enabling the climate change investments going forward? And also, how is a strong data foundation and AI linking to a better policy design and environment?
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Dr. May Mohammed Al Khalifa from Information E-Government Authority. I'm the director of GIS. We're the custodians of the Bahrain Spatial Data Infrastructure, hosting more than 300 data layers from across the government and some of the private sector as well. We also collaborate with the government entities to develop geo-enabled systems and as well to do remote sensing and geospatial analytics. In reference to what you've mentioned, Mr. Rodriguez, and to what my colleague has just mentioned as well, scaling climate solutions depend initially and fundamentally on trusted data, as well as the continuous monitoring and also verifiable outcomes. So the geospatial advances that has happened in recent years, such as the geo intelligence, the AI, and IoT integration as well with geospatial, has enabled the transformation from having static data that is available to real-time data that is continuously analyzed throughout. In addition to that, having, let's say, the systems that check and verify policies implementation is also supports the, such as we have now Binayat building permit system that regulates the building permit system in the Kingdom of Bahrain, as well as planning.bh, the urban planning. So there is a verification of the implementation of policies that support the climate change. For instance, we have the net metering solution as part of Binayat, which checks and regulates the distributed solar power connection to the electricity grid in the kingdom before the connection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now coming to the other half of the panel to talk about money, right? Because at the end, this is always the key question, right? So, and I want to discuss this with you, Sonia. So, how can we reconcile the figure that we were just discussing, right? More than $1 trillion of investment in climate technologies, but still. The opinion around it is still, they're still perceived as philanthropic kind of investments without a clear business case. How the mindset and the opinions of VCs are shifting in this environment?
So by way of introduction, my name is Sonia Wehmuller. I'm a co-founder and general partner at Venture Souk, which is an early stage VC. We've been around since 2013. We did one of our first events in Bahrain, actually, back in 2015. So this is like coming back home. So yeah, to answer your question, we're a thematic fund. So we historically have invested in over 200 companies globally. And we were sector agnostic, geography agnostic back then. 2019, we decided to take a more thematic approach. So we launched the first sector-focused fund for the region, focused on fintech, made some investments across the region, including in Bahrain. And then launched another fund focused on Web3, then fintech 2, and now we're on climate. So we're basically in the middle of launching the first early stage climate-focused fund out of the region, focused actually on MENA and East Asia. So I think one of the keynotes by the UNDP mentioned that whole corridor between the GCC and ASEAN. That's actually what we're focused on. What's been interesting, we've deployed into about 17 companies historically in the climate space. And again, what does climate mean? For us as a VC, again, early stage mainly software with a bit of hardware. But we're not going to do anything that's too research, R&D intensive, right? Because we have a 10-year fund horizon. So we also need to, return capital to our investors. So when we talk about climate within our VC world, it's really anything to do with food security, so food and ag, supply chain traceability, climate, fintech and risk management, biodiversity restoration. So these are, and energy management, of course. But as you alluded to, there's these direct levers and these indirect levers, right? So the hardware components are more on the direct side. We're kind of dealing with the indirect side, the digitization aspect of accessing some of these direct levers, right? What we found when we started investing in climate in 2018. We did our first deal. It was a UK-based company, actually. And what I found was that people in this region still associated investing in mission-driven climate founders as philanthropy. Oh, this is a do-good, I'm not going to get a financial return out of this, etc. And so there's this misconception or this two-pocket thinking-driven kind of approach of like, okay, if it's a mission-driven founder, even if they're focusing on something that's, long-term sustainable, it's kind of, the philanthropic pocket versus the for-profit pocket. And so what we realized is that in order to change things, we needed to educate the market. And so, of course, people forget that GPs have to fundraise as well. It's not just the entrepreneurs. So we have to start at the top. Let's educate the LP base in order for them to understand that you can invest in climate tech solutions and make a financial return at the same time. We've had exits at like 15x's in this space, right? So people here need to see case studies that we're not just giving money away. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors to get their money back times X, right? And so that's what led us to launch a fellowship program for the region across the GCC. It's sponsored in the past by WAED and KAUST and other players from the GCC. We've had fellows from Bahrain, from Saudi, from the UAE. And it's about how do you nurture that next generation of investor? Because it's great to be launching all these climate tech accelerators across the region. These founders aren't going to go anywhere unless the investor base is evolving. And it can't just be Aramco Ventures and Venture Souk investing in these founders. Otherwise, we're not really going to build up a healthy ecosystem. So I think we're getting there, I guess, to answer your question. I still think there's a level of education that needs to happen across the GCC in order for us to see more investors wanting to deploy in this space.
Thank you very much. And very insightful journey indeed. Dimitri, I'd like to continue the discussion on this topic with you. As we move forward into the funnel, right, of opportunity, we need additional capital to make sure that this, first seeds are effectively allowing the technology to then scale. How do you differentiate a technology that is promising from one that is not? And what are the kind of barriers that you see, and what are the enablers and the success factors that you see in technologies that are effectively then scaling up versus the ones that remains just a promising opportunity?
Yeah, thank you. To introduce myself first, my name is Dimitri. I work with Aramco Ventures, where I had strategy for the strategic venturing program. Aramco Ventures is a corporate venture arm of Saudi Aramco. And just to give you some few numbers, just to give the scale and the depth of the investments, we have approximately over 12 years of history, a few funds with a total assets under management of about $7.5 billion, and a good share of that is dedicated to sustainability. We have over 100 people working across approximately 10 offices globally. So the headquarters in Saudi Arabia, but also in California, Houston, in Europe, that's primarily London. Paris office is announced to be opened late this year. Recently opened office in Bangalore in India, and we have a couple of offices in China, Beijing and Shanghai. In terms of the portfolio, we've invested over 150 portfolio companies by now, I believe. So what makes a successful startup being ready for scaling? Several factors here. So first of all, one is typical hygiene factor for any startup, right, is to have right product, team, and execution capability. So this is not so easy. A lot of startups, they fail not because of the technology, whether it's climate or not, but because of the poor execution. So it has to be really a strong startup. Second one is climate specifics. So climate, a lot of it is driven by either regulation, so the compliance markets, or voluntary undertakings by various players. So in this case, the value proposition of startup needs to be super clear, and they need to really clearly indicate which market they serve, and they really need to prove that their go-to-market strategy is robust and they create value. Also answering the question like whether there is real commercial value in climate tech startups. So thirdly, it's about the timeline. So climate investments have been going through several cycles. Many technologies, connecting with the technology angle, they are early stage, some are quite mature, some are still a few years ahead. For example, technologies around renewables and energy storage, they are quite advanced at this stage. If you look into technologies around hydrogen, synthetic fuels, direct air capture, it's still quite a few years to go into in order to scale them up and make them cost competitive. And if you look into nuclear fusion, it's still far away, right? So it's really important for the companies which compete in this space to be able to survive and prove interim success while they're trying to achieve their key goal. Number 4, I would say, it's really the corporate traction angle, so the deployment. So this is where smart money with strategic investors come into play. And these companies need to really play well with companies which are much bigger and have different structure and different incentives. To give you an example, the corporates would allow opportunity to not only validate the technology, but also help it pilot, deploy at some smaller scale than probably at bigger scale. And then the challenge is also to not only to sell what technology company has, but also be clear about what the corporate needs. And in this case, it's really also a challenge to play with corporate systems. So it's really working with the budgeting, with technology teams. As you would know, many big corporates, they would have their internal R&D teams, and also they can take technologies available on the bigger market, which is occupied by big incumbents. So it is a bit of a competition and complementarity that needs to be explored. And lastly, I would say because of the cyclicality of climate, of the corporate engagement nature, it's really important that the startups are well funded. So quite often the companies overlook fundraising efforts. So they really need to make this sorted out in order to persevere with big clients on the longer run.
Thank you very much. I think the overview is very clear, and I want to pick up on one of the points you mentioned, which is the cost competitiveness, right? Especially in the current environment, a solid business case is what usually makes or break a new technology, and the overall, therefore, bankability of the project itself is there is much more scrutiny currently, and that's why some technologies fail a bit earlier. On bankability, Mohammed, I'd like to discuss with you. So, of course, the economics of a project are defined by the market conditions, right? However, there is still a bit of room for governments to enabling certain technologies to work through a certain set of policies and incentives. And I'd like to understand from you, what set of policies and incentives do you think are the most effective, and also what gaps do you see currently in the region related to scaling climate investment? Thank you.
I think if we look at the history, I want to start with an example. When industry and power generation were forced to remove sulfuric acid, SO2 and SO3 from the emissions back in the 60s, initial responses were like a warning from power cuts because power plants, coal-fired power plants will not work anymore. We need a huge investment to run it. Natural gas sweetening, they have to remove the acid gases because of the business case. But currently, I don't think any one of us in the room knows how much it costs for the sulfurization unit in a coal-fired power plant. We don't talk about it anymore. It has been absorbed as part of the levelized cost of electricity. What we need a forced regulation at the local, regional, and global level, supported at the initial phase with some incentives and policies. If I give example of the carbon capture and removal technologies, we see it being driven mostly and deployed in the regions and countries where they have either proper compliance markets and regulated markets for carbon. The industry is forced to remove the emissions and reduce it, or they will face some tax and penalties and charges like the European markets, or in North America and some other part of the world where they have incentives and tax refund for the projects as per the net reduction of carbon emissions. In our region, I think we need a combination of both. We start seeing initial signals of discussions on an emission trading scheme in Saudi or the region. We heard good news about how the voluntary carbons are evolving in the region, but we need to move into a full compliance market. A couple of weeks ago, we heard the announcement in Abu Dhabi about the carbon capture and storage policy being launched. That's an excellent step in the right direction. So we set responsibilities, liabilities of these climate change mitigation options or technologies. Who's supposed to invest to start with? Government responsibility is clear in these policies. And then long-term liability and responsibility for operators and project owners. We still lack that in the region, good signals, but not good or fast enough. And eventually, we need to come with a formula to give us a value for the carbon dioxide as a polluter or as an emission. A value that the emitter has to pay if they emit it to the atmosphere, or we have to get it as a revenue if we stop the emission or sell the credit or trade it with other emitters, either in the region or globally. So just to conclude, it's a shared responsibility. Working with the government and corporate are very important. Government has an initial important role in pushing these and putting the right incentives for all big companies to adapt into these technologies.
Thank you very much. I think it's clear the importance of having this cooperation between the public sector and the private sector. But of course, there is also information asymmetry, right? So the technicians on the ground, of course, have a far better understanding of the challenges of a certain technologies, while governments on the other side are probably struggling to get a clear picture of how they could help. And Dr. May, I'd like to pick up this with you. You're naturally positioned to in between, right, the two worlds. So how are public-private partnership helping to scale climate technology, and what setups do you see as the most promising and successful currently?
Well, us as a government, we already have a policy for public-private partnership established by the Ministry of Economy. Having a public-private partnership is the way forward, as we see in the government, and we've seen that implemented in several sectors as well, including what we've seen even in the building permit system, where the private sector is the reviews and approves building permits in the kingdom, while the government has the regulatory and monitoring role. So that could also be extended here, and there might be also initiatives that are in the climate sector. Digitization, having a digital system to monitor, having a geospatial system to monitor across, and having also transparency between the government, private sector, and as well the stakeholders, in addition to clear regulation that is available to all stakeholders, is important to support public-private partnership. And in terms of business models, there are a lot of business models that could be adopted based on the use case and climate change. For instance, in the case of carbon capture, having IoT connected to the geospatial system and geospatial intelligence could enable as well the real-time monitoring and as well as analysis on the impact of the carbon emissions on the climate and then the climate change. And having a PPP as well with, let's say, having us as a government providing the data, whether that's through monetization through PPP or through the open data that's available on the open data portal, would support innovations or innovative solutions that support the climate, let's say climate solution, and support the monitoring and the climate.
Thank you very much. I think we went through more or less all the key aspects and key stages of investing and scaling climate technologies and what is required. And I'd like for this last 10-15 minutes to zoom out a bit from the, let's say, specificity of each project and each technology, and to think about the GCC region in general. So, I mean, the GCC has natural advantages, has the unique opportunity now to shape the future, not only for itself, but also to become a benchmark for the world across many sectors. And I'm wondering what can be the role of the GCC region in climate investments, looking at the full spectrum from both the capital providers to owners of specific technologies up to scaling end-to-end solutions in different regions. And Dimitri, I'd like to get your opinion on this, given also your role in Aramco and the picture you have for the GCC.
Thank you for this question. You're right. So we have various funds under Aramco Ventures umbrella. So mostly we source technologies internationally from outside the GCC region, with the purpose to deploy them regionally, right? Primarily for the corporate strategy of our LP, Aramco, but also these technologies have natural ability to support overall the Kingdom agenda, right? And they are similar in the use cases for the rest of the GCC. So you mentioned several factors here. One is the capital. So for sure, the region has abundance of capital, not only from the sovereign wealth funds, but also from big corporates. On the infrastructure side, the region is kind of no stranger for big project development with a very well developed industries, energy sector, metals and minerals, chemicals. So there is a lot of talent here, both local and international. So this is also a good supporting factor to develop other projects, other technologies. So the project management is very well introduced here. And in terms of natural resources that you mentioned, so natural resources not only limited to the energy resources like oil and gas, but also the abundance of sun, right? So renewable solar is one of the cheapest in this region compared to global standards. Richness in metals and materials. So what opportunities does it open? So first of all, to the topic that Mohammed, our final panelist, covered is the carbon capture and storage for sure. So this is one of the biggest applications in the region, and the region is really blessed with various resources for this. So starting from geological storage, enhanced rock weathering, but also utilization in different other adjacent sectors like industry, cement and concrete, for example. And also utilizing this in advanced carbon materials. So this is really, I think, one of the most advanced sectors yet to be properly explored. In addition to this, it is about integrating these technologies together. So you could talk about CCS and direct air capture together, and storing and utilizing it by building CO2 hubs, for instance, and bringing other industry players which will use CO2 as a feedstock for their processes, for example. The previous panel spoke about nature-based solutions, so which has its specifics in the region, right? So we're not talking about just usual forests, but blue carbon primarily, so mangroves, the coastal ecosystems, and various applications with seaweed and algae. So this is something interesting that the region is quite rich in. If you look into the solar, not only that is abundant and cheap, right, it would be the primary clean energy source, not only to support the power sector, but adjacent industries, including green steel, green aluminum, right, and also potentially supporting and replacing fuels with synthetic equivalents, right, if you use power with CO2. So there is, I see an opportunity going forward when the region is blessed with cheap power. If electrolysis becomes cheap, right, it's going to be quite competitive fuels for aviation sector, for maritime, and in general transportation. Also there is opportunity, as we know now, very popular topic is data centers. So the region has good resources for this, and also providing also technologies for cooling data centers. So this is where we also make a few investments. Just to integrate this, the region really has great opportunities not only to support individual technologies, but see how they're developing in ecosystems, what trends are there, and with the venture capital support, identify where the bottlenecks are and which enabling technologies could be brought to the region, then supported by big project developments with local corporate strength.
Thank you very much. Sonia, I'm coming to you.
Can I, before you come to me, can I just
Please.
add to what Dimitri said? Okay. And then you can come to me again. So I will respectfully disagree with some of what you said, in the sense that, so 2 points, I think. I think it's great to invest internationally. One of the reasons we decided to focus on the MENA to Asia corridor is because actually, if you look at it, whatever little money, and it's still little money in my view, based on the deep pockets that we have in this region, is still being diverted to the West, meaning even the sovereign wealth funds, etc., they will go and back the funds that focus on US-based startups or European-based startups, right? So, you know, it's only a couple of billion really at the early stage that's been invested from the GCC, and most of it has gone west. So back to your initial question of what is the opportunity for the GCC, I know this can sound a bit cheesy, but I really do believe it. Like, I do think there's an opportunity for the GCC collectively, not individually, to actually come together and take that leadership role for the Global South. So the name of our fund is Middle to East Innovation Fund. So literally, like, be the leader for the Middle to East corridor with regards to this space. Oftentimes, people are like, oh, MENA, like, you know, what startups do you have coming out of MENA? Just to dispel that myth, like, we've reviewed over the last couple of years about 250 companies in this space. So for those who don't think that there's a pipeline, there is now. Quantity does not mean quality, okay? But there is a pipeline of companies and of great entrepreneurs who are building fantastic things out of this region. And so I do believe that for all of us in this room, it is kind of our duty, our responsibility to support our own as well. So that's number one. And also, sorry, just to add to that, if we want to see more entrepreneurs building in this space, they're not going to build if there's no capital stack, which brings me to my second point. There are very clear funding gaps in our ecosystem. Yes, Altera was launched and announced after COP28, great, but where did the money go? They went to Brookfield, it went to BlackRock, it went to TPG. These are great, but they're infrastructure players. They're not the ones who are going to invest at the early stage. They're not the ones who are going to invest into some of the companies or some of the ideas coming out of universities, for example, et cetera, who are going to fund the faculty and their ideas, right? So there's a funding gap, a genuine funding gap in this region at the early stage of the capital stack, right? And so we need to provide that seed funding, the Series A funding, the Series B funding, and then eventually they'll make their way towards BlackRock and Brookfield, right? But Like we're all part of this value chain from the philanthropic capital at the very, very early stages, I mean, it's too early for even us to invest, to then us, to then Aramco Ventures, and then the later stage players after that. And so I think that's kind of the elephant in the room is I think it's great to say, yes, we have tons of money and sovereign wealth fund, et cetera, but actually not much of that capital is going into the sector, let's be honest. And I think now what's interesting back to the AI conversation that you were bringing up, people are starting to talk about it because of that, which is good. I mean, I kind of roll my eyes when people talk about AI because I feel like every climate startup now has kind of added the word AI in their pitch decks, right? For me, AI is a layer, right? Like, so don't just put the word AI because you think it's sexy and it'll get you some funding, right? Are you AI native, really? So I think that's, sorry, those are my 2 cents.
No.
Everyone's awake now, see?
Blunt as always, so very, thank you very much. And maybe for this, these last 5 minutes, so what are then the opportunities we're missing out? If I had $1 billion, right, and I were to invest, what should I look at? What signpost and change in mindset should be the driver of my investment decisions, especially in the region?
So 2 things. I think Dimitri did great at explaining some of the sectors that they care about. They're a bit too hardware intensive for the purposes of what we do at early stage VC, meaning we'll look at more software type stuff. But before I get into that, I just want to share a little story because I also realize that we are in an echo chamber today. We all speak the same language. We all understand why it's so critical to be investing in the space, etc., right? But I can tell you as a fund manager that has to pitch all sorts of different LPs, it ain't that easy. Because yes, I can pitch the people who drink the same Kool-Aid that I drink and understand what I'm trying to do, but I'm also trying to pitch investors who don't believe in climate. I've been told not to use the word climate in my pitch decks, for example. So, and by the way, I am revamping my deck and have taken out the word climate. It's a challenge. But how do you basically reposition without changing what you want to do? Because I'm not going to change the sectors that I'm going to invest in. But how do I make it more appealing for a wider audience without mentioning the word climate for those who are climate allergic? So talk about national resilience, because ultimately that's what it's about. It's about national resilience. We're talking about food security. We're talking about water scarcity. I mean, these are things that we're talking about health, like, planetary health, human health, etc. Now we're talking about infrastructure with AI, national again. Everyone's feeling super nationalistic with regards to AI and AI infrastructure, right? So back to your question now. Let's talk about national resilience and not sustainability and not climate necessarily. Sectors that I think capital should lean into, adaptation as infrastructure, so anything that's water intelligence, climate resilient agriculture, which was mentioned earlier, climate risk analytics, which was also mentioned earlier, more software plays, right? Back to AI, anything that improves, that uses AI, but to improve forecasting and maintenance and efficiency and decision making across these sectors that we all care about that are mission critical, energy, water, food, etc. And then the third area would be climate fintech and risk management, so insurance, big one, right? I mean, we saw it with the floods in Dubai. I'm based in Dubai, by the way. We saw it with that. Like the last flood that we had, the insurance companies were very clear, we're not going to cover some of this stuff, right? So this is stuff that needs to be figured out. Data platforms that price climate risk into capital flows. So these are areas that we're actually looking at in our pipeline. My kind of main message is I think we need to stop positioning it as actually sustainability, no offense to the conference organizers, or as an impact play, but actually talk about these being mission critical sectors in order to strengthen national resilience, whether it be in Bahrain, whether it be in Saudi, whether it be in Qatar, or whether it be GCC collectively as well.
Thank you very much, everyone. It was a great discussion. We have 5 minutes at the end if there is any question from the public. Everyone is afraid to talk to you, Sonia.
I know. Of course, accuse the French woman, of course. It's after lunch. I think everyone's sleepy.
Hello. Thanks for the bold comments from all of you. And I'm Sandeep from ABS Sustainability Center. And I have a question for young generations. Like, is there ecosystem in GCC for startups and innovations? That's what is your experience? Like you said, it's from seed, or for everyone, like carbon capture is there and then it's a venture.
Yeah, be gentle.
Before seed funding.
No, okay. So we have some good examples of startup supports in the GCC countries. I agree, maybe it's not enough to drive things in the climate and sustainability domain to the level we're aiming for. But for example, I have been involved in the past in the Catalyst program at Masdar City, where they host and support the startups, and many of these startups started now producing and growing. So there are some bright examples of startups and support. Some programs, me coming from academia as well, we implemented a program also at Masdar Institute and Khalifa University where graduate students have the opportunity to start their own company and to receive support and hosting from the university to do that. So good steps in the right direction, but I think there is more need to be done on a national level where we have national funding agencies for low technology literacy level startups to move this forward. We have that gap. And especially if we talk about continuous funding support. Like you work on research, you can get funding from corporate or government for a project. But can I secure funding long term? Is there a competitive levels at national level to do that? We lack that in the GCC. So that's something yes, a grant mechanism need to work on, and the long-term type of funding and mechanism are needed.
Well, yes, okay, if you're pointing at me, I'll answer as well. Okay, let's be hopeful. Yes, I think there's an opportunity. I mean, there's a couple of climate tech accelerators that have popped up in the region already. So there is kind of that infrastructure that's being built, especially post-COP28, of these climate tech accelerators that are trying to help either bring the companies from abroad and help them scale within the GCC, or help kind of nurture the local ecosystem. So I think it's there, and there's kind of a will and a desire to see it succeed. I still think, again, if Sonia had her magic wand, I would love to see some sort of GCC fund. You know, maybe it's each of the governments that put together kind of collectively their money and pool kind of the best technologies coming out of the GCC, out of these accelerator programs. Because in my view, no founder is going to move to the region, move their business and their family to the region if there's no funding, right? So back to your point, I think there is also another funding gap, which is that grant mechanism. So for example, in France, where I'm from, you know, that's where the government steps in early on the R&D side. You do see KAUST in Saudi, for example, that's doing that somewhat, and then we're seeing some examples in the UAE, as you mentioned. I think there's an opportunity there. I mean, I've spent time, obviously, in Saudi, Oman, etc., with great professors who are building amazing stuff, but they have no idea how to commercialize, right? So there's also that knowledge transfer, right? We're also siloed, like, you know, all the academics are together, and then like all the like business people are together. And actually, maybe there's an opportunity to create kind of a safe space for the academics and the business people to actually hang out and learn from each other as well, right? Maybe I need to hang out more with some of your friends. And, you know, if they have questions on the commercialization aspect. So I guess to end, long story short, like, yes, there's an opportunity. I mean, the GCC is amazing for so many different reasons, one of which is, again, you're sitting in Europe, in the US, you don't have access to the regulators. I mean, here there's so many roundtables being organized, like they always want to hear like what's happening on the ground, what's your point of view from your sector and your point of view, etc. That's very unique. You don't have that in a lot of places in the world. So I think it's an opportunity to kind of, you know, come together, whether you're from academia or whether you're from the private sector or the public sector, and create more of these safe spaces to actually dialogue and move forward. Because I do think there's an opportunity for the GCC to take a leadership role in this. I'm serious. I'm not just saying this because we're all based here. Yeah. I'm not that scary, right?
Hello?
Hi, Dimitri. Thanks so much for covering the top technological trends. That was amazing. I have a question here. When we are dealing with the end-use energy, so which emerges as one of the, you know, the climate change or greenhouse gas source. So why don't we consider vapor compression cycle as one of the core solutions in GCC? Vapor compression cycle now is used for decarbonizing industry, domestic, but in GCC we do have here F-gas, which also it's a source of greenhouse gases emissions. How do you see the future of vapor compression systems in GCC countries?
I didn't get the exact question. If you could elaborate it.
Vapor compression cycle.
Vapor
compression systems.
Okay.
Vapor compression systems, which is the core of decarbonization of end-use energy, right? It's been used for decarbonizing domestic, decarbonizing industry, as well as transportation. Now, we do have a problem here. One of the sources of gases is F-gas. This arises as one of the sources. Now, my question here is that as research and development, how do you see the future of vapor compression system in decarbonizing industry and domestic and other sectors in GCC countries as one of the top technological trends?
Sorry, I don't think I can answer that question.
Can I
yeah, we can take it offline and can explore it.
Yeah. Actually, there's some work has been or ongoing on the subject. Now, you mentioned the side emissions is one critical point. Then the efficiency and integration with the required electricity is another issue. And then scaling it up to contribute to the base load needed in the countries is an important element in the GCC. So it could contribute as part of the solution, and I don't claim being expert in that subject, but I haven't seen it contributing as a major element yet, based on the scale of the development and how it will be integrated in the different industries. Maybe it will vary from one industry to another based on heat versus electricity availability, waste heat, and let's say valuable heat available in that industry and so on. But I don't see it at a national level in the grid, for example, yet. Not in the GCC with the current status. I might be mistaken if they're more expert than me, but that's what I have seen so far in the market. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we need to close it up. We're already running out of time. Thank you very much for the insightful questions. Thank you to the panelists for the great discussion. And see you all at the coffee machine.